It was late September when we moved into the house at the edge of the woods. It was perfect. Quiet, secluded, just far enough from town to feel like we had our own little slice of paradise. The kids, Lily and Jack, loved the big backyard, and Sarah and I were looking forward to the peace and quiet. The first few weeks were uneventful. We spent time fixing up the place, getting settled, and enjoying the crisp autumn evenings. But then things started to change. It began with the noises. At first, it was just a few bumps in the night, soft, barely noticeable. I'd hear a creak here, a thud there. I chalked it up to the house settling like any old home would do. But then, the noises became more distinct. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a scratching sound, faint, but persistent. It seemed to be coming from the walls, right by our bedroom. I sat up, holding my breath, trying to listen closer. It was as if something was clawing at the wood, right on the other side of the wall. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Sarah. But she was already asleep. I convinced myself it was just an animal outside, maybe a raccoon or something. After all, we were right by the woods. The next morning, I checked the exterior of the house for any signs of animals, but found nothing. No claw marks, no disturbed dirt, nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. Over the next few days, the scratching grew louder, and I started hearing other noises, footsteps almost, but too light and fast to be a person. Sarah heard it too. We'd be sitting in the living room, and we'd hear something darting through the walls, racing from one end of the house to the other. It was unsettling, to say the least. Then came the night we saw it. We were putting the kids to bed when Jack, who was 6 at the time, looked up at us with wide eyes. "There's something in the attic," he said, his voice trembling. Sarah and I exchanged a glance. "What do you mean, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. "I saw it. It was crawling on the ceiling. I think it's a monster." My heart skipped a beat. I tried to tell myself that he was just imagining things, maybe influenced by some Halloween decorations we had put up earlier that day, but the look on his face told me he wasn't making it up. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Sarah and I decided to check the attic. Armed with a flashlight, I led the way up the creaky stairs. The attic was dark, filled with old furniture and dusty boxes left behind by the previous owners. The beam of my flashlight swept across the room, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. And then I saw it. A shadow, something small but fast, darted across the far corner of the attic. My heart raced as I pointed the flashlight toward the movement. Nothing, just a stack of old boxes. Sarah gripped my arm, her breathing shallow. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I muttered, my voice shaky. We stood there for a few more moments, waiting for any sign of movement, but whatever it was had disappeared. We decided to head back downstairs, both of us on edge. That night, we barely slept. The scratching, the footsteps, they were louder than ever. At one point, it sounded like something was running through the walls, from one end of the house to the other, stopping directly above our bedroom. The next day, I called an exterminator. I was convinced that some sort of animal had gotten into the walls or attic, and I wanted it gone. The guy came out, checked the house from top to bottom, and found nothing. No sign of animals, he said. No droppings, no nests, nothing. I didn't know what to think. If it wasn't an animal, then what was it? A few nights later, things reached a breaking point. We were sitting in the living room watching TV when suddenly we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. We rushed in to find the cabinet doors wide open, pots and pans scattered across the floor. Something had to be messing with us. I was done. I grabbed a flashlight and a hammer and headed for the basement, where I'd heard the noises last. Sarah followed, nervously clutching a baseball bat. As we descended into the dark, damp basement, we could hear it again, the scratching, the shuffling. I flicked the flashlight toward the far wall, and that's when we saw it. The culprit of all the fear, the sleepless nights, and the eerie noises, a squirrel. A fat, scruffy squirrel was stuck behind a pile of insulation, gnawing on the wood beams. I stared at it for a moment, dumbfounded. "Are you kidding me?" I said, half laughing, half exasperated. The little thing looked up at us, frozen in place, before darting off through a tiny gap in the wall that led outside. Sarah and I stood there, speechless, for a good few seconds before we both burst into laughter. All the terror, all the strange sounds. It had been this one, industrious squirrel, causing absolute chaos. Apparently, it had found its way inside and had been living rent-free for weeks. The next day, I sealed up every hole I could find around the house and set up a few humane traps, just in case its furry little friends decided to make a return visit. After that, the noises stopped. No more scratching, no more footsteps in the walls, no more late-night freakouts. In the end, our haunted house turned out to be nothing more than a persistent squirrel who was probably just looking for a place to stash some acorns. But for a few weeks there, we were absolutely convinced that something much darker was lurking in the shadows. Turns out, we weren't haunted by ghosts, just by an overly ambitious rodent.